The massive alien ship appeared on a scorching Tuesday morning, its dark metal hull blocking out the sun over the Sahara Desert. At the remote military outpost near the desert's edge, Colonel James stared at his radar screen in disbelief. The object was bigger than anything he had ever seen, almost 2 miles wide. "Sir, we're getting more signals," reported Private Tom, his eyes fixed on the monitoring equipment. "There are at least 5 more ships entering the atmosphere." Colonel James reached for the secure phone to contact headquarters, but it was already ringing. "Yes, sir. We see them too." He listened carefully to his orders, his weathered face growing more serious with each passing second. "Understood. We'll maintain observation only." Inside the lead ship, Commander Vale stood tall and proud. His gray skin gleamed under the ship's bright lights as he watched Earth's surface through the main viewport. To him, the vast desert below looked like a perfect landing zone, empty, uninhabited, and far from the primitive humans' major population centers. "Status report," Vale demanded, his voice cold and confident. "The atmospheric composition is within acceptable ranges," his science officer replied. "We detect minimal technology in the region. The local temperature is high, but our environmental systems will easily handle it. The area appears to be mostly lifeless, Commander." Vale smiled. These humans were so foolish, leaving such a large area unused. It would make a perfect staging ground for their invasion. Their scans showed that most human civilization clustered around water sources and temperate zones. This empty region would give them the foothold they needed. "Begin landing sequence," Vale ordered. "Alert the fleet to follow our descent pattern." Back at the outpost, Colonel James and his team watched as the massive ships began their descent. The colonel had spent 20 years in desert operations, and something about the alien's choice of landing zone made him smile slightly. "Sir," Private Tom noticed his commander's expression. "Should we be worried?" "Tom, how long have you been stationed here?" the colonel asked, still watching the ships. 3 years, sir." "And what's the first thing you learned about desert survival?" Tom thought for a moment. "That the desert isn't empty, sir. It's full of dangers if you don't respect it." "Exactly." Colonel James picked up his binoculars. "These visitors just chose to land in one of the harshest environments on Earth, and they think they found an easy target." The alien ships descended in formation, their massive hulls casting giant shadows across the sand dunes. The lead ship's landing gear deployed, touching down on what looked like solid ground. But decades of desert experience would have told them that appearances in the desert were often deceiving. As the ships settled, their weight pressing down on the sand, small dust devils began to dance around their landing gear. The fine sand particles, carried by the hot wind, started swirling higher and higher. In his command center, Valo was already planning the next phase of the invasion. "Deploy the ground forces. Begin constructing the base perimeter. I want our foothold established before these primitives can organize any response." But as his crew began deploying their equipment, the first warning signs appeared. The sand wasn't just sand. It was fine enough to get through the smallest gaps in their supposedly superior technology. The initial survey teams reported strange grinding sounds in their gear, and the construction units were having trouble getting their equipment to function properly in the intense heat. Vale dismissed these as minor inconveniences. After all, his civilization had conquered dozens of worlds across the galaxy. How dangerous could a little sand be? Colonel James watched through his binoculars as the alien forces began to spread out from their ships. In the distance, he could see the telltale signs of an approaching sandstorm. The aliens had landed during the season when such storms were common, but they couldn't have known that. They couldn't have known many things about the desert. "Send word to headquarters," he ordered. "Tell them Operation Desert Watch is in effect. And Tom, get me in touch with Elder Hassan. His people know this desert better than anyone. I think our visitors are about to learn some hard lessons about choosing the wrong battlefield." The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the first whispers of the storm to come. Earth's first line of defense wouldn't be missiles or tanks. It would be the ancient, unforgiving sands of the Sahara itself. The alien machines whirred and clanked as they moved across the desert sand. Private Tom watched through his high-powered scope as the invaders tried to set up their base. He lay hidden behind a sand dune, his desert camouflage making him nearly invisible in the harsh landscape. 20 years of desert warfare training had taught the military many tricks, and staying hidden in sand was one of the simplest. "Base, this is Observer 1, he whispered into his radio. "You need to see this. They're struggling with the basics." Colonel James's voice crackled through the radio. "Explain." "Their machines keep sinking into the soft sand, sir. They don't understand that the surface isn't solid." Tom adjusted his position slightly, keeping his body in the shadow of the dune. "And their troops, they're wearing some kind of sealed armor. They must be cooking alive in there." The aliens' base was taking shape, but not as they had planned. Their landing ships formed a wide circle, with smaller structures being assembled between them. However, the fine sand was proving to be their first real enemy. It got into everything, creating problems they had never faced on their homeworld. Inside the main ship, Commander Vale was growing frustrated. "What do you mean the construction units are malfunctioning?" he demanded, glaring at his engineering chief. "Sir, the local material, this sand, it's causing severe problems. It's getting into the joint servos, clogging air filters, and interfering with our energy shields." The engineer looked nervous. "We've never encountered particles this fine and abundant before." Vale slammed his fist on the command console, then adapt. "We are the most advanced species in this sector. I refuse to believe that mere ground particles can stop us." But the problems were only beginning. As the alien troops moved around their landing zone, they discovered that walking in deep sand was exhausting work. Their heavy armor and equipment, designed for combat on solid ground, only made things worse. The temperature inside their sealed suits kept rising, despite their cooling systems working at full power. Back at the military outpost, Elder Hassan had arrived. The old man's face was weathered by decades under the desert sun, and his eyes held the wisdom of generations who had lived in harmony with this harsh environment. He stood with Colonel James, watching the alien activity through satellite feeds. "They chose poorly," Hassan said, his voice calm and knowing. "The desert does not welcome those who don't understand her." Colonel James nodded. "Their technology seems to be failing them already. What do you think about their position?" Hassan studied the screen carefully. "They have landed in a dangerous spot. When the wind comes from the south, and it will come, it will bring mountains of sand. Their circle of ships will create a bowl to catch it." Private Tom's voice came through the radio again. "Sir, you should see their attempt at setting up sensor equipment. The sand's already half-buried most of it." In the alien base, things were getting worse. Their vehicles, designed to hover above solid ground, struggled to maintain stability over the constantly shifting sand. The fine particles had begun working their way into vital systems, causing equipment failures across the board. Several troops had already collapsed from heat exhaustion, their advanced armor becoming death traps in the intense desert heat. Commander Vale stood at his viewport, watching his invasion force struggle with growing concern. His reports from Home Command demanded progress, but every hour brought new problems. The sun hadn't even set once on their operation, and already things were going wrong. "Commander," his science officer approached hesitantly. "We're detecting a large atmospheric disturbance approaching from the south." "What kind of disturbance?" Vale asked, his voice tight with anger. "We're not sure, sir. Our sensors are having trouble getting clear readings through all the airborne particles. But it's big, and it's moving fast." Unknown to the aliens, Elder Hassan and Colonel James were mobilizing their forces. Years of desert warfare experience had taught them patience. They didn't need to attack. The desert would strike the first blow for them. All they had to do was wait and watch as their invaders learned the hard way why humans had never tried to build cities in the deep desert. "The storm comes," Hassan said quietly, looking south. And with it, their first real test begins. The wall of sand approached like a brown tidal wave, stretching from the ground to the sky. Commander Vale had never seen anything like it. On his home world, storms carried water and wind, not millions of tons of flying earth. "Raise all shields," he ordered, his voice showing fear for the first time since their arrival. "Get all troops inside the ships immediately." But the order came too late for many of his forces. The sandstorm moved faster than any of their ground vehicles could drive. Private Tom, watching safely from his underground bunker, could see alien troops running desperately toward their ships. Their advanced armor, which had protected them in battles across the galaxy, now slowed them down in the soft sand. "It's starting," Elder Hassan said calmly, standing with Colonel James in the command center. They watched through special cameras designed to see through sandstorms. The desert's first attack is always the most surprising for outsiders. The storm hit the alien base like a hammer hitting glass. Their energy shields, designed to stop plasma bolts and laser fire, proved useless against the countless tiny particles. Sand found every crack, every seam, and every joint in their defenses. The high-pitched whine of failing equipment filled the air. Inside his ship, Vale watched in horror as his sensor screens went dark one by one. "Report," he shouted. "What's happening out there?" "Commander, the sand is everywhere." His engineering chief's voice was panicked. "It's getting into the shield generators, the weapon ports, even the air filtration systems. We've never seen anything like this." Outside, the storm raged. The aliens' carefully arranged base disappeared under waves of sand. Their sensor towers toppled, their ground vehicles were buried, and their troops who hadn't made it back in time were forced to lie flat on the ground, trying to wait out nature's fury. Private Tom's voice crackled over the radio to the command center. "Sir, their ships are trying to take off. They're attempting to escape the storm." But lifting off in a sandstorm was nothing like taking off in normal conditions. The alien ship's engines roared as they tried to break free from the sand that had piled up around them. The storm's powerful winds battered their hulls, and their navigation systems couldn't get clear readings through the thick cloud of dust. Two of their smaller ships just crashed into each other, Tom reported, watching through his special scope. "They can't see anything in this storm." Elder Hassan nodded knowingly. "The desert teaches harsh lessons to those who don't respect it. Watch now. They will learn what every desert child knows. When the sandstorm comes, you don't fight it. You hunker down and wait." Commander Vale was learning this lesson the hard way. 3 of his ships had been damaged trying to take off, and the rest were quickly being buried under tons of sand. The storm had turned their perfect landing zone into a death trap. "Shut down all external systems," Vale finally ordered. "Seal every opening. We wait out this storm." But waiting brought its own problems. The aliens' life support systems struggled as sand clogged their air filters. Their communications went dead as the particles shorted out their antenna arrays. Hour after hour, the storm howled around them, and there was nothing their advanced technology could do about it. In the military bunker, Colonel James studied the weather reports. "This storm could last for days," he said, "and it's just the first of many that will come." "Yes," Hassan replied with a small smile. "The desert is just warming up. These invaders think they can conquer our world. They cannot even survive its weakest challenge. Wait until they see what comes next." Private Tom's voice came through again. "Sir, I can see some of their troops trying to dig out their vehicles, but they don't realize." "Don't realize what?" Colonel James asked. "The wind's changing direction, sir. There's another storm coming. A bigger one." Elder Hassan's smile grew wider. "Ah, now they will learn why we call this the Devil's Breath. The first storm was just to bury them. This one will show them true desert fury." The aliens were about to learn another harsh lesson. In the desert, storms rarely come alone. 3 days after the double sandstorms, Commander Vale's invasion force was in chaos. Their mighty ships, once gleaming with metallic pride, now sat half-buried in sand. The alien troops struggled to dig out their equipment, but the desert sun showed no mercy. Status report, Vale demanded, wiping sweat from his gray skin. The ship's cooling systems were failing, making the command center feel like an oven. "Sir, we've lost 40% of our ground forces to heat sickness," his medical officer reported. "Our suits weren't designed for these temperatures. The cooling systems are burning out faster than we can fix them." Outside, Private Tom watched through his scope as alien troops tried to modify their equipment. They had stripped off pieces of their armor, trying to cope with the heat, but this only exposed them to the sun's brutal rays. Their skin wasn't made for desert sunshine. "They're learning the hard way," Tom reported to base. "They've got some troops trying to dig out their vehicles without armor now. Their skin is starting to blister." In the command center, Elder Hassan nodded as he listened to the report. "The desert sun is a weapon all by itself," he explained to Colonel James. "My people learned thousands of years ago. You don't fight the sun. You work around it. These aliens think they can power through it with technology." The aliens were indeed trying to solve everything with technology. They deployed solar shields, but the generators quickly clogged with sand. They attempted to use force fields to push back the dunes, but the energy required drained their power cells too quickly in the heat. Commander Vale stood at his viewport, watching his forces struggle. Another group of troops was being carried back to the medical bay. Their skin burned and cracked from exposure. Even their advanced healing technology couldn't keep up with the desert's assault. "Sir," his science officer approached nervously, "we've analyzed the sand particles. They're unlike anything in our database. So fine they can pass through almost any filter, but hard enough to damage our most durable materials. And there seems to be an endless supply of them." Vale slammed his fist on the console. "There must be a way to adapt. We've conquered worlds with toxic atmospheres, with gravity 10 times this level. How can simple sand and heat defeat us?" But the desert wasn't finished teaching them lessons. As the afternoon wore on, the temperature continued to rise. The aliens discovered another cruel trick of their chosen landing zone: heat mirages. Their sensors, already struggling with the sand, couldn't distinguish between real threats and heat-warped images. "Look at this," Colonel James said, pointing to their drone footage. "Their patrol just opened fire on a mirage. They thought they saw our forces approaching." Elder Hassan chuckled. "The desert plays tricks on the mind. Even the most advanced technology cannot tell the difference between what is real and what the heat makes you see." Private Tom's voice crackled over the radio again. "Sir, they're trying something new. They're attempting to create some kind of protective dome over their base." The aliens had deployed massive energy projectors, trying to create a shield that would keep out the sand and heat. For a few minutes, it seemed to work. A shimming dome of energy covered their landing zone. Then the wind picked up. Sand began to pile against the dome's edges, more and more, building up like snow against a window. The generators whined under the increasing pressure. Within an hour, the dome collapsed, sending a cascade of sand raining down on the alien base. "Commander," Vale's engineering chief reported, "we've lost 3 more generators. We can't power the dome and run life support at the same time. The heat is making our power cells degrade faster than expected." Vale looked at the latest casualty reports. His invasion force, which had conquered dozens of worlds, was being defeated not by human weapons, but by tiny grains of sand and the relentless sun. And now his scouts reported something new approaching. Local human forces, moving through the desert heat as if it were nothing. How? He wondered aloud. How do they survive in this hell? Dawn broke over the desert with a deep red sun. Private Tom led his team of desert fighters across the dunes, their special boots leaving almost no tracks in the sand. Years of training had taught them how to move like desert ghosts. "All teams in position," he whispered into his radio. The soldiers wore light desert gear, carrying only what they needed. Unlike the aliens' heavy armor, their clothes were loose and breathable, designed to work with the desert rather than fight it. Colonel James watched from the command center as green dots on his screen showed his forces surrounding the alien base. Elder Hassan stood beside him, nodding in approval at their positioning. The old raiders used the same tactics, Hassan said. Strike from all directions, let the sun blind your enemy, and let the sand cover your tracks. Inside the alien base, things were desperate. Commander Vale's forces had lost nearly 60% of their equipment to sand damage. Their remaining vehicles couldn't move through the deep dunes, and their weapons kept jamming with sand. "Sir," an alien guard shouted, "the sensors are picking up movement." "Where?" Vale demanded, but the sensors couldn't give a clear answer. The heat was already creating mirages, making their targeting systems useless. That's when the attack began. The human forces had painted their vehicles in desert colors. They burst from behind the dunes, specially designed tires gripping the sand like it was solid ground. Their weapons had been sealed against sand infiltration, tested by generations of desert warfare. "This is how you fight in a desert," Private Tom said to his team as they approached their target. They carried special bombs designed to work with the sand, not against it. When they exploded, they would throw up massive clouds of dust, blinding the alien sensors even more. The aliens tried to respond, but everything went wrong. Their remaining vehicles bogged down in the soft sand. Their energy weapons overheated almost instantly in the morning sun. Their troops, still suffering from heat exhaustion, couldn't react fast enough. "We've lost contact with the eastern perimeter," Vale's security chief reported. "The sand, it's impossible to see through all the dust they're kicking up." Elder Hassan smiled as he watched the battle unfold. "See how our forces attack like a sandstorm. No single point of contact, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The desert itself hides them." The human attack moved like water around rocks. When the aliens concentrated their defense in one area, the attackers simply flowed to another. Their light vehicles zipped across the dunes while the alien ships sat helpless, their landing gear buried too deep to take off. Private Tom's team reached their primary target, the aliens' main power generators. The aliens had tried to protect them with energy shields, but those shields needed constant cleaning from sand buildup. There were gaps. "Charges set," Tom reported. "Everyone clear the area." The explosion sent towers of sand into the air. As the dust clouds rose, they were caught by the hot morning wind, creating a local sandstorm that swept through the alien base. Their remaining sensors went blind. Commander Vale watched in horror as his command screens went dark one by one. "Return fire. Return fire," he ordered, but his troops couldn't see what to shoot at. The humans seemed to appear and disappear like desert spirits, striking and vanishing back into the dust clouds. "Sir," his second-in-command reported, "we're losing power to all sectors. The sand, it's everywhere. We can't keep the systems running." Colonel James watched with satisfaction as the alien base fell into chaos. Their mighty invasion force, which had expected an easy victory, was being taken apart by warriors who had learned to use the desert as their ally. "The desert gives us two gifts," Elder Hassan said quietly. "It teaches us patience, and it shows us how to turn an enemy's strength into weakness. Their technology, so powerful anywhere else, is useless here." Private Tom's voice came over the radio one last time. "Primary targets neutralized. Their base defenses are down. The desert is finishing what we started." Indeed, the wind was rising again, bringing with it a fresh wave of sand to bury the aliens' dreams of conquest. Commander Vale stood in his failing command center, watching his invasion force crumble. Emergency lights cast red shadows across his gray skin as he made his final decision. "Deploy everything we have left," he ordered. "Every working vehicle, every soldier who can still stand. We end this now." But as his troops prepared for their last attack, nature had other plans. Elder Hassan, watching from the human command center, pointed to the southern horizon. "Look," he said to Colonel James. "The desert's final judgment approaches." A massive wall of darkness filled the southern sky. It wasn't just a sandstorm. It was a haboob, one of the most terrifying storms the desert could create. The wall of sand and dust reached nearly a mile into the sky, dwarfing even the aliens' largest ships. Private Tom's voice crackled over the radio. "Sir, the aliens are moving. They're trying to launch an attack before the storm hits." The remaining alien forces emerged from their bases like angry ants from a disturbed hill. Their vehicles, what few still worked, pushed through the deep sand. Troops in damaged armor stumbled forward, carrying whatever weapons still functioned. "Pull our forces back," Colonel James ordered calmly. "Let them come to us. The storm will do the rest." The human forces retreated in perfect order, falling back toward prepared positions. They had built special bunkers, designed over generations to withstand the desert's worst fury. Elder Hassan nodded in approval. They were letting the desert fight this final battle. Vale watched the humans retreat and thought he saw a victory. "Forward," he ordered. "Don't let them escape." But his troops had barely covered half the distance when the haboob struck. The wall of sand hit like a mountain falling from the sky. Visibility dropped to zero instantly. The roar of the wind drowned out all communication. "Get to shelter." Private Tom shouted to his team as they reached their bunker. Through special viewports, they watched the aliens' last attack dissolve into chaos. The storm threw vehicles through the air like toys. Alien troops disappeared in the brown darkness, their screams lost in the wind. Their remaining sensors, already damaged by sand, went completely blind in the storm's fury. Inside his ship, Vale realized his mistake too late. The haboob's winds battered his vessels like angry gods. Sand poured in through every crack, every battle damage hole, every worn seal. Warning lights flashed everywhere as systems failed one after another. "Sir," his engineer reported, panic in his voice, "the main power core is failing. The sand, it's gotten into the cooling systems." The aliens had never seen anything like this storm. On their homeworld, storms meant rain and wind. But this was like the planet itself had risen up to reject them. The sand scoured paint from their ships, jammed every moving part, and buried everything that didn't move. "All forces, fall back to the ships," Vale ordered. But in the howling storm, few heard the command. Those who did couldn't find their way back through the blinding sand. From their shelters, the human forces watched through specialized equipment as the alien invasion force was torn apart. Their technology, so powerful in normal conditions, meant nothing against the desert's fury. "The desert teaches us all the same lesson," Elder Hassan said quietly. "You cannot fight it. You can only learn to survive it." The storm raged for hours. When it finally passed, the alien base was almost completely buried. Their mighty ships lay half-covered in sand, their once smooth hulls scratched and dented by millions of tiny impacts. The few vehicles they had left were nowhere to be seen, buried somewhere under tons of sand. Commander Vale stared at his dead command screens. The invasion force that had conquered a dozen worlds was defeated not by human weapons, but by the simple, endless grains of desert sand. And in the distance, he could see yet another storm approaching. "Commander," his second-in-command said quietly, "we have to leave, while we still can." Vale looked at the approaching storm, then at his ruined base. He had one final choice to make: retreat or be buried forever in Earth's merciless sands. The morning sun rose over a changed landscape. Where the alien base had stood, there were only sand dunes. Their mighty ships lay half-buried, like the ruins of ancient monuments. Commander Vale looked at the devastation from his last functioning viewscreen. "Begin evacuation procedures," he ordered, his voice heavy with defeat. "Any ship that can still fly, prepare for immediate departure." Private Tom watched through his scope as the aliens scrambled to save what they could. Only 3 of their original 8 ships showed signs of life. The others were too deeply buried or too damaged to move. "They're running," he reported to base. "But the desert isn't finished with them yet." Elder Hassan smiled at these words. "The desert always claims one final price," he said to Colonel James. "Watch." The aliens had to dig paths through the sand just to reach their working ships. Their remaining troops moved slowly, exhausted by heat and defeat. Many had discarded their useless armor, their gray skin blistered by the sun. Commander Vale stood in his ship's airlock, watching his troops retreat. Suddenly, the wind began to pick up again. Not another storm this time, just enough to shift the sands beneath their feet. "Hurry," he shouted, but it was too late. The sand dunes began to move. What looked like solid ground turned to flowing rivers of sand. Equipment and troops that had survived the storms now disappeared into hidden pockets beneath the surface. One of the 3 working ships tilted dangerously as the sand shifted beneath it. "The desert's last lesson," Elder Hassan explained. "Never trust what looks like solid ground." The humans watched from safe distance as the aliens fought their final battle against the sand. The 3rd ship's engines whined as it tried to break free from the sand's grip, but it was too late. It tipped slowly like a sinking ship before disappearing beneath the dunes. Vale made it to his command ship just in time. Only 2 vessels would escape Earth's surface. As they lifted off, their engines struggling against the sand-filled air, he looked down at the desert that had defeated his mighty invasion force. "Send a message to the Stellar Dominion," he commanded. "Mark this world as a death trap. The empty zones are not empty. They are weapons we cannot fight." Private Tom emerged from his hiding spot, walking carefully across the now quiet battlefield. Dead alien technology poked through the sand like broken bones. Their advanced weapons and vehicles, worth fortunes on other worlds, were now worthless junk buried in Earth's endless sands. In the command center, Colonel James received confirmation that the alien ships had left Earth's atmosphere. "Should we shoot them down?" he asked. Elder Hassan shook his head. "Let them go. They will tell others about their defeat. The desert's reputation will protect us better than any weapon." The human forces gathered at their base later that day. Private Tom joined Colonel James and Elder Hassan as they looked out over the battlefield. Already, the wind was erasing signs of the battle. Soon, there would be nothing left to show that aliens had tried to invade Earth through its harshest environment. "They chose the desert because they thought it was empty," Hassan said. "They didn't understand that empty places are often most dangerous. The desert may look lifeless, but it has been protecting our lands since before humans built their first cities." Colonel James nodded. They had better technology, better weapons, better ships. But they didn't have the one thing they needed most: respect for this environment. "The desert doesn't care about technology," Private Tom added, brushing sand from his uniform. "It treats everything the same. Survive by adapting or die by fighting it." As the sun set, the wind picked up again, singing its ancient song across the dunes. Somewhere in space, 2 damaged alien ships limped home, carrying with them a warning. Earth's empty quarters were not weak points to be exploited. They were ancient defenders, waiting to teach harsh lessons to any who would dare to underestimate them. The desert had won its battle, just as it had won countless times before. And somewhere beneath its shifting sands, the ruins of an alien invasion force would lie buried forever, a silent reminder that nature remains the strongest force on Earth.